Greetings, duelists, and welcome to another video. So, another Dragon Tail monster got revealed, and this is a very simple one. There's not a lot of explanation needed to explain what the card does and what it does for the archetype, but I still want to talk about this card because Dragon Tail is one of those archetypes where the more monsters they receive, or the more starters they get, the stronger the deck becomes. The deck already had a really strong foundation with these 4 monsters, so adding a 5th one kinda just exacerbates what the deck wants to do with all the cards that were already presented. Without further ado, let's read the new monster. So its name is Dragentail Muller. I think Muller is a reference to an astrological serpent or a scorpion. That's why you say a scorpion tail. And the card reads, during the main phase, quick effect, you can fusion summon one Dragentail fusion monster from your extra deck using monsters from your hand or field as material. Also, you cannot special summon from the extra deck for the rest of this turn except fusion monsters. If this card is sent to the graveyard as a material for a fusion summon, you can set one Dragon Tail spell and trap from your deck. Then you can negate the effects of one face-up monster your opponent controls. You can only use each effect of Dragon Tail Muller once per turn. So, there are a lot of good things and bad things about this card. I'll start with the good news first. This being another Dragon Tail Dragon type monster means that it has an additional effect alongside the setting spell and trap effect. And this is one of the better ones. Just being able to negate a face-up monster on the field at the resolution of a fusion summon during the chain is actually quite strong. First, it helps with chain blocking, so there are no direct interactions with your fusion monsters when you're activating this card, unless you want to chain the Grammel to its effect, but that's another tale, no pun intended, for another time. And this doesn't look like a very strong effect because it's on a trigger effect. However, there are monsters on the field that don't have trigger effects when they're summoned that this card is particularly helpful against. Good examples are like the Malice main deck monsters that are not White Rabbit, the Malice White Binder if they want to set a card. Ryziel Dual Drive is another monster that comes into mind. Just a couple of monsters that they don't activate immediately on summon. This card can be provided as a good monster negate against those cards. Another thing about this card that is really helpful is that it's essentially another starter. Being able to fusion into a Dragon Tail monster with this card means that you can set whatever Dragon Tail spell and traps that you need in order to fulfill your condition and your rotation with your other Dragon Tail monsters. Prior to this, the only other ways to fusion summon were with Rahu, Fiat Mena, and if you're going second, with Ketu. Which are not a lot of options if you think about it. So just having another monster that can do that, it's pretty cool. So there are downsides to this card. The first downside that I've noticed is that for this effect, you need to have this monster on field. And as of right now, by the time of this recording, there are no spell and traps or monsters that enable the summon of other Dragon Tail monsters outside of Dragon Tail Pan. But Dragon Tail Pan requires a monster to be destroyed by your opponent in order to do that. So it means that this card is normal summon reliant in order to fulfill its condition in the deck. And you pretty much like, it's not to say this is a bad normal summon, but you pretty much rather normal summon other cards, like for example the Lucius. And between Lucius and Ketu Dragontail, there are enough of those cards to go around. The other thing is, like, as good as this effect is, and the fact that it's a quick effect means that you can do this in your opponent's turn, which is also really strong, it's kind of vulnerable to hand traps. Like, let's say this is your only starter during your turn, and your opponent tries to Infinite Impermanence, Effect Veiler, or Dominance Impulse this card. Yeah, this card just falls into all those categories. But yeah, overall, I think the card is really good. Like I stated earlier, the goal with Dragontail is to fuse and amass as much card advantage with your fusion monsters and your fusion materials as much as possible. So just having another name to be able to do that in this deck is kind of really good, in the sense that Dragontail is one of those decks where its engine alone can fight through boards if your opponent doesn't have hard ways to stop it. If you remember times where you played Chimera, or you played Shadow, or you played Branded, it's very similar to that. So yeah, overall, this card is really good for what the archetype needs to do. And this archetype is really good at doing what it needs to do without the reliance of heavy non-engine. That being said, heavy non-engine can be played in this deck, which is a really big bright side. We already talked about the last time we spoke about Dragontail, all the possible other engines you can play. Blazing Cartesia is now way less necessary because of the existence of Muller. But the one thing about this card is it can be summoned with fusion deployment, and it can enable the summon of Grandwing Null, which enables a lot of other cool combos with other cards. But yeah, this is one sample build that I've made. I made this very, like, I'll say less than 10 minutes. And what's really cool about this build is, look at all the non-engine. Ash Blossom, Ghost Ogre, Ghost Bell, Veiler, Fualas, Nibiru. Like, all these cards are, you have a perfect slot for them. You don't see Infinite Impermanence because Infinite Impermanence is not a monster. And in decks like this one, where you're fusing from your hand in order to enable your fusion summons, you want as many monster hand traps as possible. You cannot play the dominance cards in here because you do have a mix and match between all attributes, which is a bit of a downside when it comes to this deck. You can't even play some of the kings in this deck, which is another downside. But I think the combo potential and the splashability with hand traps more than makes up for it. This is another build that I came up with, and this showcases Alistair the Invoker as a sub-engine. It also shows you the new Invoked Magistus monster, which is very easy and possible to summon in this deck as well. We'll probably talk more in depth involving Magistus another time, but the fact that you can play this new fusion monster in this variant is really cool. And the other really cool thing about playing Alistair in your deck is that it makes Magical Meltdown a really strong card against your opponent, because imagine that you do all your Dragontail fusion summons while your opponent cannot respond to them. Adding to that, Alistair the Invoker enables you the invocation, which means you have another way to fusion summon, like with your Dragontails. Adding to all of that, with the existence of Muller now as a main deck monster, you are available to summon Invoke Caliga, and this card is really strong. Like, this card is one of those cards that can pretty much shut down your opponent if they are not careful. And it's all possible if you play the Alistair engine. This is just another example of the Alistair engine like being used. If you are lacking like ways to start the game with your Dragon Tail cards, this is just another starter that enables that. Like when it comes to Dragon Tail, this deck is both consistent and inconsistent. It's consistent in the sense that it has essentially 12 1-card starters. Well, 1.5 card starters because you do need another fusion material for the fusion summon. However, you don't always going to open a Dragon Tail. So just having more copies of cards that enable you the ability to fuse with your Dragon Tails is pretty cool. But yeah, I just wanted to talk about Dragon Tail a little bit. We already got the full reveal, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe we're missing 1 or 2 other cards. Another fun fact. You notice how each spell and trap represents a monster in the main deck? Like this one represents Pan, this one represents Urgula, this one represents Femina, and this one represents the Lucius. We don't have one for Muller yet. So I wouldn't be surprised if they make, like, let's say for example, a card that's similar to Fusion Deployment, but for Dragon Tail monsters. That would be ridiculous. Imagine just be able to like special summon from the deck like Lucius, and then Lucius can get you to Muller, and Muller and Lucius can fuse into Grammel or Aetherion, and then these two can set these 2 cards. Like that would be really strong for the archetype. But yeah, I hope you found this informative to your liking and understanding. Justice Hunters is looking like a very promising set. Between this and Yummy, like, it's only a matter of time until our current crossover breakers metagame gets shifted again into a new era. Yeah, keep practicing and keep dueling.